Alright, with the fight edging even closer now, it's time for my last little video in preview of Chris Eubank Jr versus Conor Benn. Now when it comes to the question of why most of the British public, or maybe just the little boxing echo chambers that I've come across, are rooting for Eubank Jr in this fight, the answer is obvious. It's because they all hate Conor Benn so much, right? He's the dirty drug cheat who should be barred from the sport. He's the entitled little brat who lived a cushy life and he puts on this cringeworthy hardman act. That's what everyone says, right? And when Eubank Jr made an example of Conor Benn's drug test failure by slapping an egg in his face, he gets fined 100 grand. Not fair, is it? And then there's the whole Eddie Hearn stuff. People just can't stand Eddie Hearn. So what a moment it was when Eubank Jr absolutely owned Eddie at the first launch press conference and made him skip past his whole superfluous introduction speech. Eubank Jr also showed grace by reimbursing the fighters that were meant to be on the undercard of his original fight with Conor Benn back in 2022, which was cancelled due to Benn's drug test failure. And Eddie Hearn did not match that charitable reimbursement despite being prompted to. And Eddie Hearn has also put in that rehydration or dehydration clause on Eubank Jr to compensate for Conor Benn's weight disadvantage. Despite Conor Benn being the one who was chasing this fight to be remade, so it's his choice to take the gamble and step up to middleweight, so why not just do it normally? And then you also had the 157-pound catchweight for when this fight was first meant to happen. So of course, Eubank cut all the weight for nothing that time around. And some would say that he paid the price for that weight depletion for stepping straight back into camp for a Liam Smith fight and then getting stopped. But Eubank Jr hasn't been the most liked figure in British boxing throughout his career, to say the least. Arrogant, living off of his dad's name, a great sense of self-worth without really being that good at boxing, many would opine. Many holes in his game which has cost him when he stepped up the competition, braggadocious in his victories over a low level of competition, and never fought the likes of Canelo or Golovkin. The main points that some fans will make in criticism of Eubank Jr. But the fact is that none of those opinions have actually really changed for the most part. So it almost seems like people are rooting for Eubank Jr begrudgingly now, in hate of Eddie Hearn and Conor Benn. Fellow second generation stars, but ones who the public have way more disdain for than Eubank Jr, especially due to events that have expired in recent times. So when we hear the fans chanting, Eubank, which I believe we will be hearing in Tottenham Hotspur Stadium tomorrow night, the same chants that Eubank Sr was once heralded with, it won't be because the people are in support of Eubank Jr.'s boxing career, right? It's because he has been pitted up against two of the most hated figures in British boxing. That's how it would seem at face value. When we look into it though, there could be more layers for Eubank Jr being the good guy here. It's almost him against the world. I've put that into perspective in my family affairs video earlier in the series, so link will obviously be in the description. Eubank Jr is facing off against the Matchroom conglomerate alone, an empire that his own father helped build with that 10-fight deal back in '94. And Barry Hearn, father of Eddie Hearn, was very much Team Eubank in that Eubank vs Benn feud back in the day, which I do also go into good detail about in that family affairs video. But Barry Hearn and Eubank Sr aren't associated with each other anymore, and his son Eddie now represents Nigel's son Conor. But Eubank Sr also isn't associated with his own son Junior. So Eubank Jr is on his own against Conor Benn, who does have his father by his side and has Matchroom by his side. Oh, but there is a Eubank currently on Team Matchroom, as Eubank's sister Emily is the missus of the CEO of Matchroom Boxing, Frank Smith. Which is why Eddie thought he was doing something bringing Frank Smith up on stage at the final presser. But Eubank Jr still shut him up too. He don't care if that's his sister's man. And as for Eubank Jr not being associated with his own father, the dichotomy ahead of this upcoming fight has been crazy, hasn't it? Chris Jr and Conor are only in this position to have this lucrative fight due to their fathers' names. And in this latest chapter of the Eubank Benn saga, Eubank vs Benn 3 if you like, Conor has his father's full support and has been by his side all throughout the build, which is a major contrast to the Eubank father and son duo. Chris Sr is going off the rails about this fight and is completely rejecting it, just like he did when the fight was first meant to happen, and it actually did get cancelled. And if you listen to Chris Eubank's interviews, he does make a lot of good points about the Michael Watson situation, which I covered at length in that family affairs video, and some other stuff about weight differences. But Eubank Sr.'s recent press run, if you like, has been centred around rejecting the most lucrative fight of his son's career. On one hand, it could be seen as jealousy from Senior because he's not the one in the limelight. And you know how all the pundits say that this is a fight that the general public care about, not just boxing fans? Well, I've been made aware that clips from that Seconds Out interview that Chris Eubank Sr did is coming across the radar of people that are not into boxing at all, so he is getting the attention there. But some might see Chris Sr.'s antics as genuine fear because of the grief that he's gone through. The loss of his brother Simon, former journeyman boxer who lost his life to frontal lobe dementia, and of course the Watson fight he was involved with, and other fights he's referenced when it comes to weight differences, including his own fight with Cole Thompson. Eubank Sr. clearly ain't a fan of weight compromises, and back when there was that 157-pound catchweight for when the fight was first meant to happen, Eubank Sr. expressed his fear for the dangers of this catchweight by saying that he doesn't want to lose another son, as he of course tragically lost his son Sebastian in 2021, RIP. So with Eubank Sr. losing his son in 2021 and his brother in 2023 after a long boxing-induced bout with dementia, Chris Sr.'s public disapproval of his own son is understandable with everything he's been through, right? The potential of this fight is surely scary for him in his current mental state. But the thing is, the grief would have had an effect on Chris Eubank Jr. as well, of course. He lost his brother in Sebastian and his uncle in Simon, but he's been fairly stoic about it. And the guy he's facing off against in Conor Benn is this angry kid, crying and complaining and playing the victim about his drug test scandal, which he is at fault for if we go by strict liability. But Eubank Jr. is sort of taking everything on the chin, with all the madness going on around him, the deaths, the soured relationship with his dad. He stays stone-faced. And on the topic of comparing the hardships of Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr., yeah, they both grew up rich, so why compare any of the minor inconveniences they had to face in their cushy lives? I'm sure they were all more wealthy than all of us. But to be fair, Eubank Sr. did go broke when Eubank Jr. was just a teen, and the riches were then taken away, which probably could be worse than growing up poor all round, because he had a taste of being a rich kid and then lost it. Conor Benn moved from a mansion in Mallorca to a mansion in Australia as a teen, but Eubank Jr. moved from a mansion in Brighton to a little flat when he was about 14, he says. Then his dad sent him and his little brother off to live with random people in America at 16, so his little brother Sebastian would have been 14 at the time. So I know it's a bit weird to compare who had it tougher out of the two rich kids who grew up with famous dads, but these sort of discussions have become pertinent in this feud. Now all of this is not me saying that I'm all the way Team Eubank and we should all be hating on Conor Benn, not at all. I'm just putting the general fan opinions that I've gathered into perspective. I believe that most casual fans, or just normal people shall we say, who haven't followed all of the intricacies of the build-up, probably think that people are just rooting for Eubank Jr. in spite of Conor Benn and Eddie Hearn. And that's definitely a major factor, but the way that it's been Eubank Jr. versus everyone, with none of his own family by his side, has allowed a lot of boxing fans, from what I've seen, to appreciate him as a diligent character, unlike they ever have before. And in regards to family stuff, as I went into detail about in that family affairs video, which I've mentioned about 30 times now, the Eubank family as a whole are kind of a bunch of nutcases, I hate to say. You look to his cousins, Freedom Eubank and Luke Eubank, his little brother Joseph, whatever happened there, the history of Chris Sr. himself and his past. I don't want to paint the family out in a bad light or be disrespectful. I am a fan of Chris Eubank Sr., but one could call it a miracle that Jr. ended up so normal and has such a clean record. And Harlem as well, to be fair. But that's aside, Eubank Jr. has had to be on his game to put up with Matchroom's bollocks. And the media bias goes beyond Matchroom. That Piers Morgan interview, I didn't react to it at the time because I was working on, guess what, that big family affairs video. And by the time I finished working on that video, the whole world and my brother had posted a reaction to that interview. But yeah, we all saw the bias there, pressing Eubank Jr. about the relationship with his dad. But back in Conor Benn when it came to the drug test failure stuff, Piers Morgan loves those pressing questions, don't he? But when Eubank Jr. says, like father, like son, in regards to Conor Benn's drug test failure, Piers didn't ask him to elaborate on that particular statement, because stuff could have got dark there. I'm not the biggest Piers Morgan fan, but I don't hate the guy, and I'm not going to get too conspiracy theorist in regards to his bias towards Conor Benn, because I don't see why Piers Morgan would have any allegiance to Matchroom boxing. I think he just has a lot of personal sympathy towards Conor Benn's drug test scandal, which is fair enough, but in turn, we are then subjected to a 1-hour biased interview. And maybe Piers Morgan does have something against Eubank Jr. Maybe because one of his poker mates is someone that Piers had a fiery debate with, who knows. But yeah, it's just stuff like this, seeing Eubank Jr. hold his own against the likes of Eddie Hearn, the likes of Piers Morgan, and the fact that he has carried himself well with all that is going on, is why people are taking a liking to him. Again, I'm not here really trying to sell him as the good guy, I'm just trying to conceptualise fan narratives here. It can be seen as Eubank Jr. versus the world, or Eubank Jr. and Neymar Jr. versus the world, as Liam Smith would probably say. As for who I think will win the fight, I lean towards Eubank Jr. because of the size difference. I know it's a basic take, but it's the undeniable factor. Because even though Conor Benn arguably showed more power at welterweight, eggs or no eggs, that Eubank has at middle and super middle, if Eubank can beat up on the much smaller man in Ben, the way that he has on some fellow middleweights and super middleweights, why would I not lean towards them hooks and uppercuts that he throws everything into having more of an effect on the welterweight who hasn't faced that much heat from a man that size ever? So I'd bet on Eubank Jr by a stoppage if I had to bet on this fight. And Eubank is good value on the odds. He's not even that big of a favourite. But I'm actually not going to bet on this fight because I do just want to enjoy it as a neutral. And don't get me wrong, a Conor Benn win is very possible. Not just by knockout like everyone thinks. If he chooses smartly when to engage and when not to engage and outworks the older and more worn out man, Ben could definitely nick it on the cards. By the way, I'm not buying into all of these sparring stories from Nigel Benn too much and letting that edge me towards Ben more. Eubank Jr is the rightful favourite, but Ben points is possible. I know the narrative is either someone's getting knocked out or Eubank keeps him behind a jab and schools him, but I don't want any of you guys splashing out and hedging bets on every outcome bar Ben points. Ben points is not that unlikely to be doing that. And although I lean towards Eubank quite a bit in regards to predictions, I'm not actually rooting for him. I just want to see an exciting fight. And it's probably better for boxing if Ben wins, as he has more of a future in the sport. Depending on the fight's outcome, there could even be a rematch. But I'll be honest, as fun as this build has been, and as fun as them having a duology like their fathers could be, I'm happy for either Conor Benn or Chris Eubank Jr to win decisively tomorrow night and move on with their careers. Oh, by the way, just as I'm recording this video, I've got the news that Chris Eubank Jr missed weight by what? A 20th of a pound at the official weigh-ins, and now he's getting fined $500,000. That's some baby thing. And I'm looking forward to the card all round. This ain't the most star-studded undercard, but this is a main event that sells itself, and we've got a bunch of 50-50 fights beneath that big main event. The Bellingham Smith fight is literally 50-50 on the odds, and his opponent is piping up a bit, ain't he? So it could be a fun one. Clark versus Riley, another nice cruiserweight fight. I see why Clark's the underdog because of his last fight, stepping in as quite the favourite and losing that tough European title fight to Mosqueda. But there was a case for Clark winning that fight, in my opinion, to be fair. Good to see Liam Smith on the card, history with Eubank Jr of course, and he's in for a toughie against the undefeated Aaron McKenna. And Yard vs Arthur 3, I'm fine with it. It's one apiece, so this fight is the settler. It ain't a title fight, so it's not hurting anyone. And I'd rather see an Arthur trilogy than see Yard fight someone like one of his last 3 opponents. And although Yard's a massive favourite because of the result of their second fight, and since then Yard's loss to Beterbiev was a great fight, Arthur has arguably had the objectively better results since the two men's last fight against each other. So the undercard ain't massive, nothing to go crazy about, but they're not even selling it as such to be fair because of the size of the main event. But I will be watching this card from start to finish, and I do expect to be entertained. Also on an aside here, if Billy Joe is actually checking Eubank Jr.'s raps, then that is pretty jokes, but it just adds to the Eubank Jr versus everyone thing. So this video has been a quick last minute ending to my Eubank Ben series. There was more content that I did want to produce in preview of this fight, but with the amount of research and editing that went into all of these deep dives I already did, there was only so much I could get in before April 26th. If any of you are bored and have a bunch of free time between now and the fight, please do go and check out all of my other videos in this series before the fight if you haven't already. Some interesting stuff about all things Ben and Eubank in these vids I've done. And if you ain't got the time to watch all of the hours worth of Eubank and Ben content that I've produced between now and the fight, trust me, the content is not exclusively relevant as pre-fight content for Conor Benn vs Chris Eubank Jr. Most of it is fun trivia and interesting historical pieces regarding Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank Sr. that has nothing to do with this upcoming fight. And the stuff I did about the Suns doesn't actually have much to do with the upcoming fight either. Well, it does, but it can stand alone as its own content. So yeah, the links to all of those videos will be in the description below, so please do check them out. I'm probably going to end up doing more videos about Chris Eubank Sr. and Nigel Benn at some point shortly after this fight anyway. Not in series format though, just miscellaneous ones. But if Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. do have a rematch after this fight, then we're live again and I'm going to continue this whole Eubank Ben series on my channel. But yeah, leave your predictions for the fights in the comments, and you have been listening to O.M.E. Boxing.